Today we'll continue our cyborg journey from the robotic arms tutorial. But some of you might have noticed something in part 1. If we zoom in on these joints we made, you can see that we have some sharp edges that won't really catch any highlight. But the thing is, these edges are only a few button clicks away from looking much better when rendered. So in this tutorial, we're going to prepare this geometry for some easy lighting and rendering in Eevee, and we'll see if we can make these robotic arms come to life. By the way, if your claw ended up looking weird in part 1, try Ctrl A and apply all transforms. That should help. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to clean up this scene. So let's rename this collection to Robot Arm, and let's select the human and his bones and press M to move it to a new collection, and let's call this Human. So now if you press 1, you will see the robotic arm collection, and if you press 2, you will see the human collection. Perfect. Now let's go to the robotic arm collection and let's actually delete all the arms and all their elements except for this one arm. It might be a little bit tricky to select all of them, and let's just going to X and delete. Oh, missed one. Oh, missed another. So let's clear the rotation on this claw by going Object, Clear Rotation. Hold down Shift and press 2. So now you can see both these collections. So the reason why we deleted all these other arms is because we're going to add some rotation and location data to this arm. And we also deleted them because we're going to take a look at some of these joints, and that would be really difficult to do if we had all these arms with different armature. So let's start out by selecting one of these joints. And you can use the numpad comma or dot, whatever it is this one. And it's going to just automatically zoom into whatever you have selected, which is a really nice way to just focus on anything in your scene. So select one of the joints and you can press Shift H, which will hide everything else. So numpad dot plus Shift H is such a nice combo to just really focus on something in your scene. Okay, so here is one of the joints, and we're going to try and extract some geometry just from this basic shape. So what we're about to do is going to be a non-destructive process where we're going to add details that doesn't affect the base mesh. So to do this, we're going to use some modifiers. So go to Modifier Properties and add modifier Bevel. And this modifier just adds a little bit of geometry to the sharp edges of our model. This extra geometry is going to just catch a little bit of highlight. It's a really nice way to just add some extra depth to your geometry. Now there's one more problem we have to solve, and you can see it's all these lines. And that's because the shading is set to flat. So you can right click and set the shading to smooth. But now the shading is a little bit weird. We can't really see the edges so clearly anymore. So let's collapse the armature modifier and let's add another modifier called Edge Split. And as you can see, this creates a much smoother looking surface on our mesh, and it plays really well together with the bevel modifier. So let's reveal the rest of the scene again. Let's press Alt H, and now you can see that this is the only object that has been gone through this treatment. So now we want to copy the bevel and the edge split modifiers to all the other joints. So we'll start out by hiding the human collection. So let's press 1. And now if you press A, everything will be selected. Hold down Shift and select the claw, and then select it one more time. So now the claw is deselected, but all these other meshes are selected. And now locate the original joint that we applied this to. Hold down Shift, so this one is highlighted the last. If you go to wireframe mode, it's really easy to see which one is highlighted. And then let's go Ctrl L to open the Link Transfer Data menu, and let's say Copy Modifiers. So now you can see that all these objects have the same modifiers as the first one, but they still have the shading set to flat. So to fix this, let's right click and set the shading to smooth. So now these joints in a robot arm is going to catch much more highlights from our lighting. And you'll notice if you start adding glass or glossy shaders to this geometry, that it's going to look a lot better than if you haven't used the bevel and edge split modifier. But there's a problem. If I'm pressing play now, our animation is suddenly only playing at 18 frames per second, and it used to be 30. So by having the bevel and the edge split modifier enable in our scene, we are losing some performance. And I think that is incredibly important to keep the performance as high as possible when you're working with the animations. So what we want is that these changes are only visible in the final render, but they don't have to be visible when we're working with the animation. So the button we're looking for is this one. This little TV icon. Let's zoom in on this one and let's see. If we disable this, now you can see that the bevel is disabled and now the edge split is disabled. So to disable this on all of them, press A to select all, and you can hold down Alt, and if you click the same button, bevel, and then edge split, now it's going to look a little bit weird, but if you press play, we have exactly 30 frames per second. And this thing that we just did is especially noticeable once we get our 3 other arms in place, because then it would definitely lag a lot more. So it's okay that this looks a little bit weird right now, because now this is only disabled in the viewport and it's going to look much better in the final render. So to make this arm look more alive, we're going to add some location and rotation to it. So let's go to Object, Animation, Insert Keyframe. And the hotkey for this is I. So this brings up the Insert Keyframe menu. And here we can see that you have location, rotation, scale, and we're going to choose location and rotation. And you can see this little line under the O here. That means that the hotkey for this is O. So if you want to be really fast, you can go I, O. And this inserts a keyframe on the location and the rotation. So to see these keyframes, let's right click on this line and let's go vertical split. And in this icon in the top left corner, we can set the editor type to Graph Editor. So here you can see all the keyframes as these colorful lines. And you can open up this little menu and you can see that we have rotation and location. So this is a regular timeline. So here we're at frame 0 and here we're at frame 100. You can press G to move these keyframes up and down, and that will change the value of them. So a really nice trick to making something come to life in Blender is to give it procedural random motion. And we're going to do this by using modifiers for these keyframes that we just made. So let's select the X location keyframe and let's open up this menu, which is this little arrow, or you can press N, and let's click modifiers. So now we can add modifiers to this keyframe. And the modifier we're going to use is called noise. So what just happened is that we just generated a lot of noise, and you can actually see it right here. This values just goes up and down really fast. And you can increase the scale of this noise, and you can lower the strength. So now when you press play, you have this random movement and just moves back and forth. So I think this is moving a little bit too fast, so we can increase the scale. Let's do like 120 or something. Now this looks a little bit more dreamy. You know what? We can still see the movement of the human right here. So let's go ahead and just press 2 to go to the human collection. And if you click this little icon here, this little check mark, this toggles the channel mute. So you can mute all the keyframes of the motion capture. So now when we go back to collection number 1, we can see that this one is standing completely still. So now we're sort of isolating the motion of this robotic arm instead, which makes it a little bit easier to work with. Okay, so that's the X location of this empty object. So to copy this motion from the X location to, for example, the Y location, it's this little icon, copy F modifiers, and let's go to Y location, and let's paste. So now when you press play, you can see that it goes back and forth. But it goes back and forth diagonally. And the reason why this is happening is because these have the same face. You can see these look exactly the same. So what we can do to fix this is select the Y location, and you can change the face. So you can just click and drag this. 400 is probably enough. And now you have a much more random movement that goes randomly on both the X-axis and the Y-axis. So now let's go to the Z location, paste it there, and let's just give this a random face. Now let's press play. But now the problem is the face that we ended up having by just clicking and dragging is actually exactly the same. So now our human mind can sort of recognize that, hey, this doesn't look really random. It looks like it's going back and forth like this. So we need to make sure that every time we change the face, it's a value that is nowhere else on these locations. And this also applies once we're going to start copying these to the rotation. So what I like to do is just click on the face and then just give it a long random number. So you're sure that you're not making something that looks similar. Because I feel like our brain is really good at just telling when some movement is not completely random. So this is at least an attempt to make it so. So now let's go to rotation and let's press paste. We also need to change the face here. And I think the rotation is a little bit too weak. So let's set it to 0.5. And actually let's go back to the location and lower the strengths a little bit. I think it's a little bit too much. It looks like it's almost underwater if it's too much. Like seaweed just going back and forth, you know? Now let's go Y rotation, and let's paste, random face, Z rotation, paste, random face. We can actually make the strength a little bit higher, I think. Let's do 0.8 on the rotation. Yeah, I think this looks a little bit alive now, don't you think? It's like it almost has a little bit of a brain, or it's like idle in the same way as our mocap is idle. I don't know, but I like it. So let's do the same thing to the claw. But we can't just add rotation value to this object because this is rigged. So we're going to have to go to the pose mode. And now let's click this first bone. You can see that you can rotate this on the x-axis, for example, and then this one as well. Remember to press X twice, so it's the local x-axis. And let me show you something that's going to make this animation much easier. If you press N, you can get up this menu, and you can see that it's basically these values that we are going to be animating. And the reason why this has 4 values instead of just 3 is because this is set to quaternion, and I find this extremely difficult to work with. I'm not sure if it's what you're supposed to work with, but I feel like it's a lot easier if you set this to XYZ Euler instead. So now you can only animate this one instead, which makes this a lot more easy. So let's do this for this bone as well. XYZ Euler. So now let's go to the beginning of the animation. Let's select one of the bone and let's right click on this and let's go insert single keyframe. And let's do the same for this bone. Right click, insert single keyframe. So now let's hold down Shift and select both of them. You can open these little menus and here you can see X Euler rotation for the bone 1 and for the bone 0. I haven't named these bones, which I probably should, but you can see what it is. So now you can see that if we take this keyframe and move it up and down, we can move this bone and we can move the other bone. So we can move both these bones and we have full control of the claw. So let's actually add a little bit of just idle animation to these claws as well. So let's paste this and let's give it a random face. Go to the other keyframe, paste it and give it a random face. And maybe these can actually be a little bit faster. So let's lower the scale. Yeah, so here you can see it goes through, so these are clipping. So we have to make sure that the strength is so low that that doesn't happen. We can also open them up a little bit more. So it's like this. You can press G to move these up, so you know that they're not going to close completely. Okay, so that's good. So now that we have made our claw animated, let's duplicate the claw so we have 4 claws again. And this is going to be a little bit different than the last time we did this in part 1, so bear with me here. So let's press A to select everything and then press Shift 2 and make sure the human is not selected. And we're going to view this from the back. This time, this duplication process is going to be a little bit difficult because we have keyframe animation data here. So everything that is duplicated is going to want to go back to this area if we start playing the animation. So after you've duplicated this, it's very important that you don't touch the timeline because that's going to mess everything up. So once again, let's focus on the placement of the claw and let's press Shift D, duplicate it over here. And let's take another one down here and here. And now you can move the armature just like we did. Like this. We just have to do it roughly. We can fix it after. And now it's very important that you don't touch the timeline because you have to select these 3. They really want to be here because they have all their keyframe data at this location. So to prevent these from just jumping right over there, you have to insert another keyframe. So I, and then let's press location. So now when you press play, you have 4 robotic arms that is synchronized in an idle motion. So I don't think it looks really realistic that all these arms are synced up. I mean, they're robot arms, so it's probably possible with the technology this guy have. So what I want to do next is I want to change the face of these 3 robot arms and these 3 claws. And unfortunately, I don't know of any way to do this really easily. What I just end up doing is hold down Shift and then select all of these. And now you can see this big list of all these keyframes, which are basically the number of times we're going to have to just write a random face. So to give all of these their own unique animation, what we're going to have to do is to select this first one, which is the X Euler rotation for one of these claws. And let's just click the face and just type a random number. And then the next one, type a random number. And then for all these, you just have to type a lot of random numbers and you're just going to hope that they don't line up with any of the others, and most likely they won't. And this will take probably 20 seconds. Perfect. Now we can press play. So that's a little bit cool, I think. They're a little bit more alive. And what's really, really cool about this, you have a keyframe for all of these on the first frame. So what's really cool is you can move to, for example, frame 50, and you can just move this around and animate it. Maybe this one. And let's take both of them, and then let's press Insert, Location and Rotation. So now when you press play, this animation is going to go on top of the animated noise, which is so cool because that means that the noise is not getting in the way for like what we want these claws to do. It's just like an extra layer of life that is on top of this. This way of adding modifiers to the keyframes in Blender, it's such a powerful way to animate. So now let's have a look at what this looks like with the motion capture. Let's select the human armature and let's enable the motion again. And now you can right click on this line and select join areas and click on the one you want to remove. Now you can press play. Let's turn off the overlay, which is Alt-Shift-Z. I actually think that this motion capture is too animated. I think there's too much happening in this sequence. So let's see how incredibly easy it is to just change the motion capture. It's very, very easy to just swap this entire animation sequence and just parent these armatures again to the new model. So let's do that. Let's just go to our second collection, select everything that's related to this human, and press X and delete. And now if you go back to the first collection, you can see that our arms are just standing completely still and these guys have nothing to be parented to. So let's go back to Mixamo. Let's find one that is more subtle. And this is the one that we have, the breathing idle, where it goes quite much back and forth. So if we were to be zoomed out like this in a video game or something, I think this would be an appropriate amount of animation. But if we're up close, I think it's a bit too much. Yeah, I think this one is much better. This one just called idle, number 5. It's quite subtle actually, but I think it could work. So let's go ahead and download this one. Let's just click download. And now let's go back to Blender and let's go to the human collection. Let's go file, import, FBX. And let's find this new one called idle, import. Now you can press Shift 1 to reveal this one again. This is perfect because now the size is correct as well. Let's rotate this on the Z-axis by a value of 180. So all that remains now is to do this super easy parenting of the bone. So just press Ctrl Tab to go to pose mode and select the bone you want to parent these to. Ctrl Tab to go back, select all of these 4 armature. Let's hold down Shift and select the human. Ctrl P, parent to bone. So now we can press play and we can see that we have a much more subtle motion capture. And what's really cool is that it just works. It's really easy to just swap out the motion capture. And this didn't have to be this model even. You could have used any of these other characters on this website, or you could photoscan yourself and do something crazy. I think this workflow is really powerful actually. Fix this little glitch here. There we go. Okay, so now I'm just going to make these, just go back to this animated like this and like this. IO. Okay, so now it's a little bit weird animation, but you can see that it works. Okay, so let's render this out as a video file. So to do this, I'm going to create a camera. So let's go Shift A, camera. And now this camera is placed right there. Let's just find the angle we want to have. Here is good. And then let's go View, Align Active Camera to View. And this will teleport the camera to just our original point of view. So now if the camera is selected, you can see it highlights like this. You can press G and maybe Y to move it on the Y-axis, or Z or X, or so let's just do a little bit of framing here. Let's actually move it a little bit back. Perfect. Since we're not going to be animating these bones anymore right now, if you want to, you can go to the overlay and you can turn off the bones. And this just cleans up the viewport a little bit. So to view this from the camera again, you can go View, Cameras, Active Camera, which is numpad 0. So numpad 0 is really nice to just go back and forth. Okay, so let's create a ground. Let's go Shift A. Let's create a plane. I'm gonna scale this up. And now let's go to the render properties. Make sure you're in the Eevee render engine. Now in the top right corner, you can set the viewport shading to render. If you like, you can turn off the overlay and you can see that this is our rendered image. So let's go ahead and enable ambient occlusion and let's turn on bloom and let's turn on screen space reflections. So to create a light, let's go Shift A, light, and let's do a spotlight. And we're going to move this on the Z-axis, place it above like this. You can right click to increase the power. Perfect. And what's really cool is that since we have the bloom enabled, you can actually increase the power so much that you get bloom from the diffuse. And that is really cool. I think that's actually quite realistic. Let's view it from the camera. Let's turn off the overlay. And I'm actually going to turn off this widget as well. So here's a really nice way to just frame the camera. You can press RR and it's really sensitive, and you can hold down Shift. And it's just a nice way to just move the camera on sort of like a 2D plane. It's basically just a pan and tilt. So let's select the light again, and you can right click adjust the spot size, you can change the light blend, and you can select the light radius. If you're on a laptop or on a slower computer, I recommend that you just set the light radius to 0, so you have a harder lighting. And this is going to make it render a little bit faster because you can lower the samples a lot, and it's not that noticeable. Let's keep the light radius there, I think. A little bit of a soft light. And let's render a still image. So let's go render, render image. Okay, so two things. I want a darker background, and I want this transition here to be completely smooth. So first of all, let's make the background darker by going to the world properties, and let's lower the strength. It's so cool to be in Eevee and just see these changes happening in real time. And you know I'm a cycles boy, but just changing things in Eevee in real time is so cool. So let's make it a little bit dramatic. Okay, now, so to make this seamless transition from the background to the world, all you have to do is to make a ground plane that is perfectly white and diffuse. So select the plane, and let's go to material properties, and let's click new material, and let's call this ground plane. Under surface, click this principled BSDF menu, and let's set this to diffuse. And now, if we turn off the overlay here, we can zoom in, and we can see that if we set the color, click the color, and if you set this to completely white, the border just disappears. And this is a really cool way to just make this infinite background, especially when you just have a spotlight like this. Now, what's really cool is that these still look really soft and really weird, but let's do a render. Let's go render, render image. So now we can zoom in on these arms, and you can see this beautiful highlight that shows up because we did the bevel and the edge split. See here? This just adds a lot of our brain's understanding of this geometry. And I think it's a really efficient way to just add details to your scene. Okay, so here's a still image. And if you like, you can save this by going image save and select the format here. But this is an animation. So let's render this as a video file. I actually want to move the light up a little bit. Perfect. So we get this quite dramatic thing on his chest. I think that's really cool. Oh, by the way, if you want more precise shadows, you can select the light and you can go to object data properties. And under shadow, you can enable contact shadows. And this will just fix some of the stuff that is happening in here. You can see here's not the proper contact shadows. And I mean, if you want real shadows, you go to cycles. But Eevee is actually super nice for just communicating the animation that we're doing in this preview. So to render this as a video, let's go to output properties, and here we can see our resolution. So let's actually lower this to 50%. So it's going to render much faster. Let's go down to the output here, and let's click this folder icon. Let's go to our desktop, for example. Let's call this Robotic Arms version 1, and let's click accept. Okay, so the file format, I highly recommend that if you're going to edit this further in DaVinci Resolve and stuff like that, I have a whole video on why you should render this in EXR. But right now, we'll just do a simple preview flipbook. So let's set it to FFmpeg video. So now everything is good to go. This will create a Matroska file, which is .mkv. And if that's weird to you, you can set it to MPEG-4 or QuickTime or whatever you want. But I think this is good. So let's go render, render animation. So this is rendering incredibly fast. That's good. Okay, so the render is finished. Let's have a look. I'm actually surprised by how good the shadow looks. It looks alive. And remember, we didn't spend any time actually animating these arms, we just did the procedural stuff. So if you were to spend like an hour animating this scene after we did all the procedural noise animations, I think you would be impressed to see how incredibly far you would get. And this entire workflow is going to cost you $0 because Blender is free and open source, and the motion capture from Mixamo is also free, and this tutorial is free, so make sure you create something that you really care about. I hope you enjoyed this workflow and that you'll create something interesting with this. Remember, you can change anything about this rig. You don't have to have this shape, you don't have to use a human, it doesn't even have to be claws, it can be completely different. With each of these tutorials, I also create some project files that I share on Patreon, so please feel free to check that out. It's a really great way to support the channel. It honestly helps a lot and keeps me going. Thanks for watching.